Well, I think that our biggest concern was to make sure that we were doing our maximum to support the government effort in terms of constraining COVID-19. But I think in the very early stages we all were aware of the amount of fear and anguish and concern there was about COVID-19, and we felt it was really important to reach out to those who may be isolated on their own, or indeed those who were shielding.
An Garda Síochána prioritised its resources on public safety, and again we will focus on doing everything we can to keep people safe. And we are asking people to work with An Garda Síochána to protect our communities, in particular the vulnerable, the elderly and those at risk of domestic abuse.
Everything has changed nationally, internationally indeed, since COVID started, and the policing was different. We had to get back into the community and support the vulnerable people in our society, whilst also at the same time being aware of the regulations and the enforcement of same. And it was all about engaging. You're meeting with people at checkpoints. Where are you going? We have to be aware of, explain the regulations, because there were new regulations coming out every 2 weeks or whatever. It was confusing for people, and we understood that it can be confusing for ourselves at times. So it was important that we could explain to the members of the public exactly what the status quo was at the time. We're in COVID times, we have to be careful, there are restrictions, and the reasons for the restrictions, the fear of transmission of the disease throughout the pandemic.
Attention.
07 Lima Delta. Uninsured and untaxed. It's a silver Ford Mondeo.
You've seen throughout the countryside, checkpoints were on 24/7. On busy times, you'd see the checkpoints, say, off the motorway, particularly coming down the country. So all that type of thing, but it's not something that whilst you would have checkpoints on the go throughout normal times, but these were different. These were COVID checkpoints.
And just on that, in terms of the standard operational guidelines and PPE and so on of Gardaí and how they interact with the public, what sort of measures have the Gardaí had to take to make sure that they themselves are safe and that the public are safe?
Well, obviously wearing of masks, washing of the hands, even in the station, which was really difficult. We've had to get used to wearing masks in the station at all times, engaging with the public wearing a mask. And it's funny, when you're speaking to somebody, it's only when we all had to wear masks that you realised how much you actually watch somebody's face and how much you actually read lips, to understand what they're saying, because suddenly everybody's wearing a mask, and it was, it's
blind.
It was sort of confusing. It took a while to get used to it. But in terms of ourselves, PPE, we might have to wear bodysuits going into a house perhaps, because you didn't know what you're going into.
Well, I suppose fundamentally, Declan, one of the biggest changes we had is that we went on a 12-hour shift, the contingency roster for COVID, and that meant that it released more guards and more community guards into the streets and into the communities for vulnerable people, the elderly, people cocooning, the over 70s at the initial lockdown stage. They were cocooning, and I suppose in essence we all became community policing, not just the specialist units but all guards in every station became community guards for the first few months of the lockdown, because obviously crime and stuff, traffic had reduced, so it was getting into the community and dealing with the vulnerable, dealing with the elderly, dealing with the people cocooning, and that was simple things like collecting their shopping, prescription collections and deliveries, or even something as simple as collecting the newspaper for an elderly person cocooning. So I suppose it was important for us to have a visible presence in the community in the first period of lockdown, because everybody was anxious, it was unknown territory. So just to reassure people that the guards were out there, I suppose we were seen as the enforcers, if you want, of COVID. And I suppose it was important for us as community police people to look at the humanitarian side of the guards during the initial lockdown. And you probably heard we were operating the graduated policing response. The 4 E's were engage, encourage, explain, and as very last resort, enforcement. So I suppose from our point of view it was important that we were seen, that we were at the front of it as community policing, and again that meant dealing with other statutory and non-statutory organisations to make sure we got to the vulnerable, that there was nobody lost or forgotten about in the community.
The community engagement team there really, they hit the ground running in terms of engaging with the elderly people in the community, the vulnerable people in the community, doing runs for prescriptions, things like that, getting the newspaper, getting a few messages, simple things like that mean an awful lot to vulnerable people.
I think we showed a humanitarian side of our work during lockdown, particularly the first 12 months, and I think it's something that we can build on. And I think that they saw the face of the Gardaí as humans. When we take off the uniform, we have families, your restrictions, cocooning, elderly parents, grandparents, we were all affected by that as well. So I suppose when we put on the uniform, we could bring that with us, and we knew calling to an older person or somebody that was nervous, you can empathise with them from that point of view.
So there's a big community safety effort, and I think the thing that we really will take from this, the longer lasting piece, will be our community support, our community police, and that'll stand us in good stead for the years to come.